Recognized, Uncle Walker, D01. Recognized, Red Arrow.
That's Crispin Freeman, B06. Update.
Initiate Part 1.
It'll be like old times. You and me, training, fighting crime, just hanging out, shooting the...
You're confused. Probably thinking of the other guy. The original, the one you stopped looking for. Me, I'm just... We get it. You're a clone. But you're not the only clone on this rooftop. And I know from personal experience how tough it was to come to grips with being a copy of someone else. That's why I gave up my identity as Guardian, so that I could figure out exactly who Jim Harper is supposed to be. That's not the only thing you gave up. Roy, you know we both spent years looking for the original Speedy, and everyone else here did the same. We never found him because the light didn't keep him alive. It was Cadmus' policy to delete the source material. He's dead, brother. Which is all the more reason you have to live, to honor the Roy that was.
I'm not sure there could be more Aster in the cave today, because we have the incredibly talented Crispin Freeman with us. In addition to being the voice of Speedy, Red Arrow, Guardian, Roy Harper, and more in Young Justice, Crispin's voice acting career stretches back to 1997. That's 20 years this year, with the Slayers anime series. His filmography is literally too long for me to read, stretching across scores of anime films and series such as Wolf's Rain, Naruto and Howl's Moving Castle, video games like Call of Duty Black Ops, Batman Arkham Origins, and Overwatch, and animated series like Spectacular Spider-Man, Wolverine the X-Men, and of course, Young Justice. Crispin is not only a talented voice actor and host of the brilliant Voice Acting Mastery podcast, he's also a mythology scholar, sharing his insights on the influence of mythology and religion on popular culture storytelling. To quote from his Mythology and Meaning website, "It is my firm belief that we become the stories we tell ourselves," and I could not agree more. Crispin, we are honored to welcome you to the cave. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me on. It's like virtually being back on the show or something.
Oh my gosh. We'll take that as a compliment.
There you go.
Before we begin, I want to remind everyone that our discussion episodes draw on anything and everything related to Young Justice, including both seasons of the series so far, the comics, and the video game. If you've not seen, read, or played all of the material and are spoiler wary, consider this your warning. In this interview, we may also spoil any number of other projects Crispin has worked on in the past, so keep that in mind as well. And with all that out of the way, let's dive in. So our usual question, which is, when did you first see Young Justice, doesn't really apply. So can you tell us the story about how you came across the part of Roy, how you got the part of Roy?
Yeah, sure. I had actually first met Greg Wiseman way back in 2001. I had started voice acting in New York City while I was doing theater. I'd gone to grad school for acting in New York at Columbia. And my final year there, I hooked up with a friend of mine who was doing some dubs of anime. He found out that I was a big anime fan, and so he put me in touch with one of the studios that was doing the dubs, and I auditioned, and I finally got into one of their shows. And then my current wife and I met, and she was a huge fan of the animated series Gargoyles. And for some reason, it had never come across my radar. I think it was because it probably...
Wow.
Yeah, and I think it's because it probably came out when I was in college, and when I was in college, this was 90 to 94, while I was a hacker and a computer science guy, the web didn't exist yet, and I was out in the boondocks in Massachusetts, and so I was really cut off from most media for 4 years. And I remember I subscribed to comic books when I was in college, and I remember big full-page ads for Gargoyles, but I never had access to TV, so I couldn't see it. So she's like, "Oh my God, you have to see this Gargoyles show," and I watched it, and I went, "Oh my God, how have I not known about this?" And there was a Gargoyles gathering that was happening in LA. And so we went to it in 2001. And I met Greg, and Greg said, "Oh, you're great. I'd love to work with you. I'm working on this Team Atlantis animated series for Disney based on the Atlantis movie. If you come out, I'm sure we could probably find a part for you." And so I was like, great. And we moved out to LA, and the Team Atlantis series got canceled because Atlantis didn't do so well at the box office.
Right.
So it took a very long time before Greg had another project that we could work on, and that was Spectacular Spider-Man. Right. So he brought me in for Spectacular Spider-Man for the voice of Electro, and we had a lot of fun on that. And then that show got canceled after 2 seasons. And then there was this Young Justice thing coming up. And so I auditioned for that. And initially I was called back for Superman and Superboy. So I was sort of in the running for that. But of course they decided to go with Nolan North, which I think was a better casting choice. But in the process of that, they they realized that I could flip between a sort of older version of myself and a younger version of myself, which is what they were sort of looking for Superman and Superboy.
Right.
And so without any auditioning for it, they just told me, hey, you're Speedy. And I was like, oh, okay.
Nice.
And then on top of that, you're going to be Guardian. Oh, okay. And use your same voice. Well, aren't they different characters? No, they're clones. What? Well, it's complicated, but Guardian is actually a clone. He's an older version of Speedy. And, hold on to your hats because it's going to get weird from here. I was like, oh, okay. So
fantastic.
I was in the dark for a lot of the beginning, except that I got to play the sort of grouchy sidekick, don't call us sidekicks. And I thought, okay, right. I'm in. As soon as I saw what we were doing with Speedy in the first episode, I was like, oh yeah, no, I totally understand why you cast me as this character. This fits much better. So I was very happy with where I was cast in Young Justice.
That's fantastic, which opens a whole can of worm of questions for me that we'll get to in a minute. But it's pretty clear, and you just mentioned it, but you could also tell from your podcast and your website that you're a big animation fan. So, and you had mentioned that you had collected comics in college. So can you unpack that a bit? Like, how much of a comic fan were you before you started working on these projects?
Yeah, no, when I was growing up, all my favorite shows were cartoons. And when I was 6 years old, my father came in and caught me watching cartoons after school and basically yelled at me and said, what are you doing watching all these stupid cartoons? And I'm sure he was yelling at me because I wasn't doing my homework,
Right.
But I remember at 6 years old making a promise to myself that when I became a grown-up, I would still like cartoons. So nice. I have that episode to thank for the career that I have today. Thank you, Dad. Appreciate that. And so I'd always loved comic books and read them when I was younger. They would keep me quiet on the plane when I would travel with my family. They have these big compilation comic book things. And so I read comic books all through high school, and your normal fare, one of my favorites was ElfQuest.
Oh my God. I got a chance to meet Richard and Wendy Penny. ElfQuest was hugely influenced on me as well, and I'm a little surprised I've only brought it up, I think, once on the podcast. Actually, I think I just brought it up in the last discussion session that aired with Emily Booza. Man, ElfQuest, guys, go find the original run. It's amazing. It came out in an age where independent small press comics were not a thing. Like, there was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and there was ElfQuest, and that was pretty much it. Everything else was Marvel and DC, and that was all. So just to find it was hard enough as it was.
Yeah. I mean, I read my X-Men and I read my other stuff, but ElfQuest was the only comic book I ever went hungry for.
Yeah.
There was a day in high school where I had enough money to buy lunch, or I had enough money to buy the final collected graphic novel of the original quest of ElfQuest. And I said, I've got to know what happens. And so I went and bought it.
I'm all no choice. There's going hungry, man.
Years later, I'm at a convention, and this woman starts walking towards me, who's a little older, and she's got this look in her eye. And when you're a guest at a convention, you know this look. Like, someone's locked eyes with you, and they're going to come talk to you, and there's nothing you can do about it, right? and you don't know what's going to come out of their mouth. It could be scary. You don't know.
Right.
And this woman comes up and she goes, I'm Wendy Penny. You may know my friend who's a voice actor who works on this, this, and this. And I go, I don't know who your friend is, but you're Wendy Penny. Right? And she looked at me, and this happens to her a lot. She goes, oh, you're one of mine, meaning that I'm one of her elf children. Right. And I said, yes, I am. And this also always happens. I identified my character. I said, I'm Suntop. And for those of you who've read ElfQuest, Suntop is the young son of the two lead characters, Cutter and Lita. And he's this sort of shaman who can channel elf and spiritual energy. And he's this really interesting male shaman character. And I said, I'm Suntop, with my blonde hair and everything. And she looked at me, she goes, you are. And so she has people like that in her life. I was meeting with her later. I mean, we're good friends now. And I was meeting with her later when she was doing a reading of her amazing Mask of the Red Death, which was having a staged reading. And there was a guy there who was filming it for her, who's also one of her children. And honestly, I don't remember his real name, but he had this shocking red hair and pale skin. And he looked at me and said, I'm Pike. And I said, of course you're Pike. I'm Suntop. And he's like, yes, you're Suntop. And that's how we know each other. We know each other by her elven archetypes, not by our own real names. So there you go.
Did he have like wasn't it Pike that would eat the dream berries?
Yeah.
get all messed up. Yeah.
I don't know about his personal dreamberry habits, but he definitely was Pike.
Oh my God, that's fantastic.
Yeah, so basically comic books were always very important to me. And then what happened in college was that I was under so much stress that I needed to take breaks, but I couldn't take a hour break to like watch a TV show or something. I needed something quick that I could do just briefly and then go back. And comic books were perfect. So ironically, the only time I ever subscribed to comics and had them delivered was when I was in college, because they were like a quick 15-minute break. I could refresh my brain and get back to work. So that's sort of my background. And then when I got to New York, there was this store on the Lower West Side near NYU called Anime Crash. And they had this amazing collection of anime. Again, still barely an internet. I mean, this is like 95. And so,
Right.
you know, the first browser had just been invented. And so it was all VHS tapes, and that was my access to stuff. And now the kids just have it easy. You know, I mean, it's just there's content. Back in my day, I had to walk uphill both ways in the snow to get my anime on VHS, and I was happy with my dubbed Robotech. You know, I mean, it was, you know, so, yeah, it's been interesting to meet all the people. I mean, I was a huge Robotech fan when I was a kid, and now I work with Tony Oliver, who played the voice of Rick Hunter all the time. And
Oh my
it's just
God.
very weird sometimes to be working with all these people that I sort of idolized when I was young.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you, because Christopher Jones and I got in this conversation. I asked him, like, do you ever let just like, because he's got this hilarious picture of him in like a Superman outfit when he's 10 on his website. And I'm like, do you ever let 10-year-old Christopher out to look around and go, look at what you get to do? Like, do you do the same thing? Look around and say, this is what you get to do when you get older?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it also is sort of like, there also is a point where I look at it and I go, well, of course, this is exactly how it was supposed to go. For instance,
Right.
when I was in college and grad school, well, in college, I majored in theater, but I minored in computer science. I almost double majored in computer science, but they wanted me to take a class on linear algebra, and there was just no way. I was like, call me when the artificial intelligence class comes up, but otherwise forget y'all, right?
Right.
And they would make fun of me because, you know, actor boy, what are you doing in the computer science lab? And it was because I had a certain obsession with audio. And at that point, computers were just getting fast enough to do professional quality audio. And I wanted to do sound design in the theater. And it was all on like reel-to-reel tape decks. And I'm going, guys, this should all be on a Mac and we should be running it, you know, off mini disc decks and, you know, all this stuff. And this continued all the way through grad school where I was both acting and sound designing. Like sound design helped keep me in the room. If they didn't want to cast me in a show, I would say, okay, I'm not the actor you want, but could I sound design the show for you? And so it kept me on the project.
Nice. That's a great idea to be able to still stay there in their area. You know what I mean? Like you're always there in participating and probably doing them a favor for that matter.
Right. I mean, a lot of entertainment is just who's in the room, you know?
Right.
If somebody's in the room and they're good, keep them. You know, and so I wanted to stay in the room. And I met this fantastic sound designer called Darren West, who is now just amazingly famous and won all these awards in New York City. He signs his program Soundscape by Darren West. And the first time I saw it, I thought, what a, you know, pretentious. And then I heard what he was doing. I was like, nope, he's absolutely right. You know, and so I was sort of at his feet of the master, sort of interning and learning from him. And he sat me down once and he said, Crispin, you're a good actor. You're also a good sound designer, but you're going to have to make a choice. You can't, in New York City, be both. You're either going to have to commit to being an actor or you're going to have to commit to being a sound designer. Choice is yours. You could succeed either way. What are you going to do? And I was like, God, that's tough. I don't know how to solve that. And then this voice acting thing comes along. And not only do I get to voice act, but every day I'm working with the fanciest audio equipment on the planet. And I'm like, see,
Nice.
There was a way for this all to come together and work at the same time. You know, so invariably I find myself, as time goes on and I relax and trust that the universe is going to set things up for me perfectly as long as I'm personally in alignment on stuff lines up and I go, but of course that was the way it was supposed to go. You know what? It couldn't have worked out any better. So yeah, I mean, absolutely. But I also come to this stuff with a great level of respect and appreciation, but it's more a sense of responsibility. When I step up to play a character, you know, people go, oh, don't you geek out over the fact that you're playing that character? I'm like, no, because I'm sweating bullets to make sure that the audience is getting the experience they want. And so it's like the cook in the kitchen. They go, oh, don't you just love this food? Well, yes, but I'm making it for you. And so I'm going to be sweating bullets in the kitchen to make sure it tastes really good for you. I might have a taste later, but I'm not sitting here going, oh my God, I just love these pastries pastries. No, I have to make sure you love the pastries. And so that's why when you're in it, when you're cooking, people are like, isn't it great? And, you're sweating and you're dripping into the soup and you're like, oh, yeah, it's great. Do you like it? Is it good? Can I rest now?
Right.
So yeah, there's a lot of enthusiasm, but it's not the same experience as being the diner in the restaurant. Being the cook, making sure it all comes out well is a different set of responsibilities.
Yeah, that's amazing. I remember back in my prose writing days, Brandon Sanderson had said something on Writing Excuses, his podcast, and he was talking about how somebody asked him a similar question, and his answer was very similar to yours in that he was like, no, I take this kind of like a responsibility. Not everybody gets this opportunity to be able to do this. Like all the stars aligned and things aligned for me to be able to do a thing that I absolutely love, and I am not going to take that for granted. I am going to do the best that I can with these opportunities that I have. And that's a little about what it sounds like that you're doing. And we're clearly hearing the love coming across in the work that you do.
Well, good. Thank you. I mean, that's one of the reasons why when I go to, say, conventions and whatnot, people want to call me by my character name. And I get that. That's fun. But I go, yeah, but I'm actually Crispin, and Crispin is working really hard to make sure that you like that character. So if I ran around the convention going, I'm Red Arrow, that would be a little weird, That would be like the cook saying, I'm the pastry. And it's like, no, you're not. You're the guy who made the pastry or helped make. Right. I'm not the only one. The animators helped make Red Arrow too.
Right, exactly.
So we're all, and the writers as well. And so we're all collaborating to make this thing really good. And that's how important it is to us.
And everyone knows you're Suntop anyway, so that would be really weird.
Right, exactly. Right? We don't want to confuse things. Right. Come on.
Don't confuse things.
Keep it straight. When I was in college and I sang in my a cappella group, we would sing at other colleges, and one of these colleges wanted each of us to write a little sort of tagline for everyone in the group to describe them, to sort of say who they really were, and we all forgot to do it. And so the two guys who ran the group, like our business manager and the music director, they did it for all of us. They just wrote down what they thought our taglines should be, and they were all perfect because they all knew us really well. And mine was, elves are people too. And I was like, yes, they are. Elves are people too. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Now, after talking about all this, when I was listening to Voice Acting Mastery, you did this, I don't even know how to describe it, this flat out genius interview with Phil Lamar.
Oh, thank you.
Needs to go listen to because it was amazing. But you were talking about back and forth about kind of how things started for each of you, which was interesting. And you had mentioned that acting wasn't always a thing you wanted to do. So, but your parents, your grandparents, they were supportive of the opera and theater and that kind of thing. And somehow you told this story about going backstage for the first time. Can you share that story?
Yeah, sure. What happened was that my grandfather became a successful lawyer like in the middle of the Depression, which is sort of amazing. I'm not quite sure how he pulled that off.
Wow.
And early on, when he finally started coming into some money, a friend of his approached him and asked him to donate some money to a composer who was putting his composition into a competition, a musical competition. So he did it, and the composer won the competition. And it so tickled my grandfather to be the patron of this composer who had won this musical competition that he just started supporting everything. And so he founded money to support the Nelson Algren Awards for short stories. He gave a bunch of money to the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. But his biggest contribution and the thing he was most involved with was the Lyric Opera in Chicago. He was their legal counsel pro bono for most of his life, and he gave a lot of money to make sure that the productions happened. And he founded the organization that does the critical editions of Verdi's operas. This is at the University of Chicago Press, where they go and they research all the different versions of Verdi's operas to come up with the most historically accurate version. And sometimes the versions are different over time, and so they'll give historical reasons why this version or that version might be used when they're staging an opera. This is still in existence. I actually just saw a production of it a little more than a year ago now, of Nabucco at the Lyric, one of their critical editions. It was amazing. So I was a little kid, and I was a shy little kid, and because my grandfather and, of course, my father got involved in this as well, they were both big fans of the opera, but none of them were performers. They weren't singers. They just loved this, and my grandfather had all the cast parties at his house. So as a kid, I was growing up around these opera singers with these huge voices that would terrify me. I'd go run and hide because whenever they would sing. It was just so loud. I was like, oh my
Yeah.
God. And so they thought it would be really cute if I would be a kid at the opera. You know, they had this term called supernumerary, which we would now sort of call an extra on a set. You don't have to speak,
Right.
but they just need bodies. And I was a
Right.
skinny kid, so I could fit in the costume, but I was terrified. I didn't want to have anything to do with this. I was a very shy little boy. But somehow they convinced me to do one when I was in like 6th grade. And so they took me backstage at the opera. And if you've ever been backstage at an opera house, it's a city back there. It's so big, you have to take elevators to go up and down. You understand why the Phantom could hide back there because like there's so much room. And so I would go backstage and these people would walk off the street, cast members would walk off the street into the backstage area. They'd go up an elevator, they'd come back down and they'd be Henry VIII, right? With the costumes and the makeup. And I was like, this is cool. Like, that's awesome. And then they'd go on stage and they'd create these illusions, these stories for people on stage. And I'm backstage, so I can see all the writing on the backs of the set and the flat, so I know how they shift. And I got sort of fascinated with being part of making the magic of being backstage. And so I kept going. I was skinny enough to fit in the costume, which is all I really needed to do and not burn down the place. So, although I came close one day. But so I did I think an opera a year, like 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And then by freshman year, I was sort of too old to be a kid at the opera anymore. And my voice wasn't really right for the chorus. And so I started auditioning for plays in high school. And that sort of is where my acting career sort of started.
Nice. Yeah, that story is hilarious. I can picture you wandering back amongst the kind of the organized chaos that happens behind stage.
I mean, the Chicago Lyric Opera is an old school opera house in that in order to store these flats that make up the set, right, they can be pulled up off stage into the fly space. There's enough fly space that you can stack 2 whole sets on top of each other. Right? Because they have to when they're in rep and they have to switch back and forth. So the complication of the fly system is astounding. And it literally is, I mean, how tall is each set at the Lyric? I mean, it's got to be 50 feet. Yeah, it's huge. So you've got like 50 feet tall and then you've got that twice over again in the fly space. And you have to make sure that they all can slot down where they need to and they don't bump into each other or they don't hit somebody on the head. I mean, it's really complicated.
Yeah. And you were how old? Like 8?
This is 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So this is like, 11, 12 to 13, 14, that sort of era.
Man. That's crazy. Okay, well, of course we wanted to have you on the show to talk about Young Justice and the experience of playing Roy and working on this great show, and we have some questions a little bit later. But as you and I were talking, we discovered that what we're trying to do here on Whelmed parallels some of what you are presenting through your panels on mythology and meaning. But I mean, we're both taking something that we love, in this case, animation and popular culture, and using that as a springboard to talk about writing and the creation process in a broader sense. So when did your interest in the mythology and the background of storytelling theory start?
Well, I think what happened was when I was young, all my favorite shows were cartoons, and I didn't know why. And I went off and I started doing theater, as we've discussed, and that high school theater turned into college theater, turned into graduate school. But when I was in graduate school, I sort of had a bit of a life crisis. Things weren't working right. My art wasn't going very well. My romantic relationships were terrible. My personal life did not feel good. I had hit a sort of bottom, a crisis point, and something had to change. And one of the things I realized is that I didn't know why I was acting. Like I didn't know what did I have to say? I was rightly called out about this by some of my professors at grad school. They would say, "Crispin, you move well, you speak nicely, you look nice. Why am I not always interested?" This was Andrei Sherbon, this crazy Romanian director. And I was like, wow, yeah, that's bad. What is up? And so I was very fortunate at that time that I discovered 2 things. One, I rediscovered my love of anime. Between the end of high school when I was watching anime on television and college when I had no media, when I got to grad school, I got to that Anime Crash video store. And also the Sci-Fi Channel back then was doing something called Saturday Morning Anime. And so they were playing old school anime like Record of Lodoss War and Lensman and Project Echo and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, this is pretty cool, but this looks just like Robotech. And Robotech was a while ago. I have a feeling we've moved on since then. And that's when I was fortunate enough to find this anime store in New York City and started getting back into anime. At the same time that I was rediscovering anime, I was also put in touch with Joseph Campbell's work on comparative mythology. That was coming from my directing teacher, the head of directing at Columbia. She had mentioned Joseph Campbell's book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And I was able to find his PBS series called The Power of Myth, where Bill Moyers interviewed Joseph Campbell over 6 episodes. So I was rediscovering anime, but now I had Joseph Campbell as a sort of Rosetta Stone to unpack why I love these stories so much, because it was a little odd. When I looked back as a Midwestern kid raised in Chicago and also at times in Montana, why are all my favorite animated shows Japanese? Like, why am I not happy enough with Spider-Man and Superman and the American fare, you know? But all my favorite cartoons were Japanese, and so I had to figure that out. And Campbell gave me an explanation. He explained to my conscious mind why I was subconsciously attracted to this type of storytelling. And it had to do with the archetypal hero journeys and the mythological influences, that I was not the kind of actor who was fascinated with sort of Arthur Miller, Death of a Salesman realism. That was not going to be my bailiwick. What I was fascinated with was stuff that either was more Shakespearean or more fairy tale or more classic Greek tragedy or Sufi mysticism in something like Farid Uddin Attar's Conference of the Birds. That when you had someone who was going on a mythological hero journey, whether it was Luke Skywalker or anyone else, then I was riveted. And so then I was able to look at what was happening in the Japanese storytelling and see, finally, because of what Joseph Campbell was giving me, the lens he was giving me to be able to understand this, I was able to unpack why I was so attracted to the Japanese stuff, why the Japanese stuff worked differently from the American stuff. And then it was really enriching as an artist, but I didn't think of it as anything other than something that I loved and I would share with other people, say, hey, look at this cool thing I found out about storytelling, and isn't this awesome? Until about 1999, when there was an event at the Japan Society called an anime symposium. And a symposium is different from a convention, firstly because of the spelling, and secondly because there's no dealer's room. There's nothing to sell. This was a gathering of people to talk about anime and manga as an art form. And there were some amazing people there. Mamoru Oshii, who directed Ghost in the Shell, was there. He was premiering the world premiere of Jinro. He did the Wolf Brigade there. Frederick Schott, who's this amazing writer on manga and was Tezuka's translator for many, many years into English. He was there translating for some mangaka, some manga artists. And there was a guy there by the name of Kenji Uchida, who was a producer for Sunrise Animation, which gives us such wonderful anime as Gundam and The Vision of Escaflowne and Cowboy Bebop and stuff. And he got up there and he said something fascinating. He said, when you want to make something stronger than a human being in America, you make a superhero. But when you want to make something stronger than a human being in Japan, you make a giant robot. And I was like, what? You're absolutely right. And why? And my hand shot up and I said, why? And he sort of dismissed me. He said, oh, differences between religion and culture. And that was it. Well, I was I was an unhappy camper, to say the least. And I think he could feel it because it was a weekend symposium and this was the last day and they were about to close the entire symposium for the day. And Uchida-san stopped it. He said, wait a minute, I didn't answer that man's question well enough.
Oh, nice.
And he said, okay, here's the deal. It has to do with notions of God. It has to do with how you define God, and whether you define God in anthropomorphic terms, as they do in the Bible, where they say that we are made in His image, and so you have a superpowered individual who is like a person that you can walk in the Garden of Eden with, or in Japan, do you define God as a force of nature? So you talk about Amaterasu, who is the sun goddess of Japan, and we talk about her as a goddess, but she's really the sun. She's really this cosmological power. And so you have these giant robots that are vaguely humanoid shape. We can think of them as humans, but they usually represent some larger cosmological power. And many times they're made of stuff that is divine. So that Mazinga Z, which was one of the big innovations of giant robots back in the early 70s, we called it Transor Z over here. It was the first time they put a pilot in the robot. Before, robots had been remote control. So this is the first time the pilot is sitting in the head of the robot. And Mazinga Z, his name means demon god in Japanese anyway, but it turns out that the only metal that can make Mazinga Z is alloy Z, and the only place you can mine alloy Z is from Mount Fuji. Now, Mount Fuji is a god. It is called Fujisan, right? So Mount Fuji is what's called a guardian kami, a guardian god in Shinto that protects a certain area of Japan. And so you're literally making a giant robot out of god stuff. And then I was off to the races. I was like, okay, I've got to start figuring all this out. And that's where my obsession came with the storytelling was, okay, whenever I see patterns in storytelling that cut across creators, I have to figure out what's the mythological influence, right? Because it's not that individual person that's doing it. Everyone's writing superheroes, or everyone's writing giant robots, or everyone's doing Power Rangers. It's not linked to one creator. There's got to be something low on the brainstem in the lizard brain that people are doing, and they're doing it even when they don't know. That was the wonderful thing that Bill Moyer said in the Power of Myth documentary series. He says, mythology is the music of the spheres. We dance to it even when we don't know the tune. And so that's been my goal, is to sort of unpack that in as many things as possible. The reason I do it is twofold. One, obviously, is it helps you as a creator. I'm trying to broaden the buffet of possible storytelling options so that you can choose things that are most appropriate or most appealing for the story that you're making. Or you can hybridize them if you need them. Tolkien was a brilliant hybridizer with Middle-earth. He took ancient sort of Anglo-Saxon Wotan traditions and combined them with his devout Catholicism and made this thing that's really compelling. So you can do that, but that's only one purpose. The second purpose for me is self-actualization. We become the stories we tell ourselves, and so it behooves us to have control of those stories. If we want to be the authority for our own life, if we want to author our life, then we need to know what story we're telling ourselves. And if we don't like the story that's working for us, then let's find something else that works better. And so the one part of it is for those who are creators, and the other part of it is also for those, I guess you could say, who are consumers, right? Who may not be interested in making art, but for whom this art speaks to them. When they dress up as the character, when they're in their Jedi robes, they're trying to align themselves with the wisdom underneath the storytelling. A ritual is a reenactment of a myth. So when you keep going through this ritual of reenacting these stories, your mind is trying to internalize the wisdom that you find so subconsciously attractive. And if I can make your conscious mind aware of it, then you have so much more ownership and power over what you want to accomplish in life.
Absolutely. My wife and I, we have 2 little kids, and she knows I have a very, very active imagination, obviously. But she and I talk a lot about this, the idea of not just encouraging their imagination and stimulating their imagination, but teaching them to use their imagination as a positive tool, as opposed to the negative tool that we as human beings often use our imagination against ourselves on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why I want, again, with Whelmed, taking Whelmed and saying, look, this is a great show. Let's talk about the craft and the art, right? Let's talk about that kind of stuff. But then let's use that to talk about bigger picture stories and what is storytelling about, and what do you, as a watcher of Young Justice, what story do you want to tell us about you so that we can know you better by giving yourself more control over the imagination and how you use it in your own mind. I was also very influenced by that interview back in college as well. What you just said answers a little bit of what my next question was I noticed some of the names of some of your panels, and I wanted you to expound on that, but one of the panels that you do is called Giant Robots and Superheroes. So now clearly I understand what that's about, but you also have the Mystics, Priestesses, and Warrior Women, and another one on Knights and Dragons. Are you unpacking those like as mind-blowingly as the Giant Robots and Superheroes comment? Like, can you tell us a little bit more about? Oh yeah, can you give us a little through line on those? I mean,
sure. I can expand on the descriptions that are on my website. For those who are curious, I have a website called mythologyandmeaning.com where I list all of the different presentations that I do. There's sort of a brief summary of what they're all about, and there is also a trailer on the website for the presentations, so you can get a sense of what they might feel like. It's really interesting what you say about story. Before I jump into the description, I believe that we are the animal that tells stories. I think that is actually our evolutionary advantage over other animals, is that we're not the fastest, we're not the strongest, but we pass data from one generation to the next so that our amount of information increases exponentially compared to other animals. And the way we do that is story. I'm not sure why, but our brains remember things better when we tell it as a story. And so when you're talking to your kids about stories and being constructive, we are raised because we have this long period of dependency. We're 13 or 14 before we can even do anything for ourselves effectively, and 21 before we're full maturity. We have this long period of dependency on our parents and our other authority figures that are taking care of us. And those authority figures install in us certain stories, and they do it usually with the best of intentions. And some of these stories are really great, such as all men and women are created equal and all are entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's a pretty good story, right? That's not a bad thing for us to install. But invariably, there are going to be other stories that are installed that maybe don't mesh with your personal psyche very well. It is then that you need to go in and say, wait a minute, this program that's running is not helping me. And it's not the only program out there. There's another way to think about this that could be better. And so I basically have two families of presentations right now. Hopefully, eventually, there will be three. And those families are animation, film, and video games. I've been able to do a lot more work on the animation and the film stuff. I haven't had as much time to devote to the video game mythology, and also video games keep changing so quickly. It's a little harder to pin down. But the animation ones tend to be more of, shall we say, a cross-cultural comparison between American mythology or European mythology and Japanese mythology. The reason being is that the West and Japan tend to be the titans in animation, in producing animation. People are like, why don't you talk about African animation? I'm like, because there isn't much. There's not that much to talk about. So the animation presentations tend to be a more of a cross-cultural comparison, so you can see what the possibilities are. You may have been hemmed in a little bit in terms of your thinking, and when you see what's possible in another culture, you go, oh, we could do it that way. That was certainly what happened with Wendy Peeney when she was writing ElfQuest, as she was so inspired by Tezuka and was going, oh, you could do it that way. So that's what those are about. My film presentations are a little different. They tend to focus on sci-fi and fantasy films. And they're not so much a cross-cultural comparison as looking at what's called the monomyth. Joseph Campbell talks about this in The Hero with a Thousand Faces, which is the structure of the hero journey, which is similar cross-culturally. The hero has to have the call to adventure. He often denies the call. Then he has the first threshold. Then he gets swallowed by the whale. This is a structure that has become, in some circles of Hollywood, cliche, right? Oh, yes, we all know the hero structure. We've watched Star Wars. We know what's going on, right? And so I will go through these films and I will explain the structure just so you can see it, but that's just the beginning. The next question is, why tell this story? You could create a story that would be compelling to many people formulaically by following this monomyth hero journey structure. But why? What is the metaphysical wisdom that you're trying to express? And the metaphysical wisdom from something like episodes 4, 5, and 6 of Star Wars is very different from the metaphysical wisdom behind, Frank Herbert's Dune, is very different from the metaphysical wisdom behind Middle-earth. And so when you understand that, then you can look at episodes 1, 2, and 3 of Star Wars and go, why don't these feel right? Oh, because they contradict the cosmology of 4, 5, and 6. Yeah. When Luke is running through Dagobah with Yoda on his back, and he asks Yoda in Empire Strikes Back, is the dark side stronger? And Yoda says, no, not stronger. Easier, quicker, faster because you can use hate, but not stronger than the light side. Okay? Fast forward to episode 2, you listen to the commentary track of George Lucas, and George Lucas says, well, clearly Anakin chose the dark side because the dark side is stronger. George, listen to Yoda. He knows what he's talking about, right? You're contradicting yourself. The whole cosmology of 4, 5, and 6 is sort of Taoism and Zen Buddhism. The stuff that's coming out of Yoda's mouth is like classic Zen Buddhism. But everything coming out of Qui Gong's mouth is Abrahamic. It's all about virgin births and the will of the Force. It's all biblical. And it is possible to find a way to synchronize those two. The Matrix does it really well, but it takes a lot of work. And George didn't put in that work, so it doesn't fit. No. And so people go, I don't know, it just feels wrong. I go, I know exactly why it feels wrong. This is why. So now I'll get to the descriptions of the panels. The Knights and Dragons panel is mostly about the fact that the dragon is so different east and west. So the dragon in the West is Maleficent in Sleeping Beauty. Now you must deal with me and all the powers of hell. Right. And the Western dragon is a fire-breathing creature that hoards two things, gold and virgins. Right. Now, it doesn't know what to do with either of them. It just holds on to them, right? It can make use of neither the gold nor the virgin. It just grips. And so it is this sort of negative aspect of the ego that just grips and hangs on, and there's no vitality, there's no life. And so often in Western storytelling, what you have to do is slay the dragon, this fire-breathing dragon, to release the bounty, right? To revitalize the environment, to cure the wasteland.
Right.
That's not how it works in Asia. In Asia, most dragons are water bringers. They're spirits of water, and yes, they are powerful, but they're not evil. So the Chinese emperor is a dragon, and Chinese fathers want their boys to grow up to be good dragons. And so when you look at something like Spirited Away, and you look at Haku, spoilers, and you find out that he's actually a water dragon, that he's a spirit of a river, then it makes perfect sense that Chihiro and Haku sort of fall in love in Spirited Away. Prince Philip and Maleficent ain't going to have any kind of affair. Like, it's not going to work, right? So when I see that kind of discrepancy, and it's repeated over and over again, or sometimes there's bleed through, like The Neverending Story, where Falkor shows up and he goes, I'm a luck dragon. Well, yes, because look at him. He's long and serpentine like an Asian dragon.
Right,
He's
exactly.
not a fire breather like Smaug or Maleficent.
Right.
And so I sort of unpack what that's about and what the different journey is for the hero. Because in the West, you have to slay the dragon. But in the East, you have to sort of tame it. And so the spiritual lesson that the hero is learning is very different East and West. One is a doer and one is a becomer. You know, Chihiro doesn't have to do something. She has to become something. Prince Philip in Sleeping Beauty doesn't become anything different. He's pretty much the same all the way through. He has to do something, right? And so this notion of the physical doing journey versus the spiritual becoming journey is very important in how the cosmologies work. And this stuff gets played out in anime really well in something like The Vision of Escaflowne, where you have both Asian and Western dragons working together.
Ooh, that sounds interesting. I've never heard of that one.
The Vision of Escaflowne is hands down one of the best anime series I think I've ever seen. It was done by Shoji Kawamori, who was the guy who created Robotech Macross. And it's this fabulous story of a young girl who goes off. She's sort of a magical girl. She goes to this magical world, and in this magical world, they have giant robots, but the giant robots are like steam-powered. They're all brass and gears and wheels, and they creak, and they fight with swords, and they're powered by this magical energy, which is a dragon heart, right? They kill these dragons, they take the heart out of the dragon, which turns out to be this crystal, and when you put the crystal in this weird sort of Jules Verne giant robot, it works. And so one of them is this giant robot called Escaflowne, which everybody is all on about. And like, what's the deal? Well, in the 4th episode of this thing, you see this Escaflowne robot, which looks like a big white knight with a sword and a cape. I mean, you can't get more sort of Western knightly, right?
Right.
In the 4th episode, it turns out this thing can transform. Remember, this is the guy who made Robotech, you know, planes transforming into robots.
Yeah.
So this robot transforms, and what does it transform into? The knight transforms into a dragon. The cape becomes the wings of the dragon. The guy who was sitting inside the robot is now riding the back of the dragon. I mean, it's astounding how this thing works. And I go, so wait a minute, you just put the knight and the dragon in the same body. This is going to be interesting.
Huh.
Right? How do you reconcile this? And then it turns out the guy who's piloting the dragon is also half human, half dragon.
Okay.
And I go, oh, bring this. And it's like... It's 39 episodes of brilliance of unpacking what this is all about. And sort of threshold after threshold that the hero has to go through to learn the spiritual lessons, and he keeps screwing it up and having to learn again. Oh, it's absolutely brilliant. It's still probably my favorite anime TV series ever. So yeah, that's Knights and Dragons. The Mystics, Priestesses, and Warrior Women was all about female hero journeys. And basically, there are female hero journeys that are available in Japan that are unavailable in the West. It's back to this, are you going on a doing journey or a becoming journey?
Okay.
So in a doing journey, you tend to slay a dragon. In a becoming journey, you tend to come to a spiritual realization. So Jesus, the Buddha, they don't have to go out and kill any dragons, but they do have to come to a spiritual realization. And so historically, doing journeys are male journeys. Right? You have to go out, you know, killer of enemies or slayer of dragons. It tends to typically be a male journey. And spiritual becoming journeys tend to be female. Tend to. They don't have to, right? You can have a guy go on a becoming journey, and you can have a girl go on a doing journey. And so I was noticing that when girls go on doing journeys, when they're slaying dragons, East and West, it's pretty close, right? They're going out, they're slaying dragons, I get it.
Right.
But the becoming side, the spiritual side of the equation is very different. Because in America, we have Disney princesses. But in Japan, they have magical girls.
Right.
And Sailor Moon and Disney princesses are radically different archetypes because Disney princesses have no magic. They can't have magic because in the West, if you're a woman with magic, you're a witch. But that's not how it works in Japan. A woman with magic in Japan is not a witch. She's a shaman. There's this archetype in Japanese culture called the Miko, or the Shinto shrine maiden.
Right.
And the job of the Shinto shrine maiden, and if you watch Sailor Moon, you'll realize Sailor Mars is a Shinto shrine maiden. She dresses up in the white top and the red pants. That's an indication that she's a Miko. The Shinto shrine maiden's job is to protect against evil spirits and also to channel benevolent spirits. Miko can channel both kami, the gods of Shinto, and they can channel tama, which are the spirits, the dead spirits, who have yet to go to the permanent afterlife. And so they do this in order to help their community. And there's a famous story about a queen. There was an ancient Japanese empress who was a Miko. She could channel spirits. And her husband was the emperor. And her husband wanted to consult with the gods to see if he should invade Korea. All right?
Okay.
And so she channels the spirit, and there's also a Buddhist monk there who helps with this whole process. So there's 3 of them in the room. And the emperor says, should I go forth and conquer? And the god says, yes, go forth and conquer Korea. And the emperor was like, but wait a minute, I don't think that place exists. I think you're wrong. And the Buddhist monk says, do not contradict the gods. That's a bad idea. The lights go out, the lights come up, the emperor has been struck dead. Okay. So now the empress is in control, okay? And she's been told by the gods to go conquer Korea. And so it turns out she's pregnant. So she puts a rock on her belly to postpone her pregnancy and goes out with this spiritual guidance, the gods of Japan commanding her to go forth and conquers Korea. And she's held up as both a temporal leader and a spiritual leader, right? She's both a war hero and a spiritual hero. Go over to France with Joan of Arc. Joan of Arc has the same issue. She has a god that tells her, go forth and conquer. Except she's burned at the stake as a witch.
Right.
Right? And that has to do with the religious traditions. In the West, when you're dealing with the Abrahamic biblical traditions, any supernatural power must come from God. And if it does not, then it comes from the devil. And so any woman who claims supernatural power and is not willing to subjugate herself to the patriarchal hierarchy of the priesthood is a rogue agent and must be satanic. Yeah. So no Disney princess is allowed magic.
That's so interesting to me because we've obviously been watching like Moana every day.
Right.
Now that it's out. But I didn't see it in the theater, but I saw the trailers. And I remember specifically saying, oh, that's interesting. She has the powers of Mara.
Right.
And you know what I mean? I'm like, oh, she's a waterbender. This is really interesting. And I never saw it in the theater because we have kids and you don't get to the theater when they're that young. And so we got it. We bought it. I'm watching it and I'm going, oh, what?
They wouldn't give her magic.
Maui has the magical powers and she doesn't have control over the ocean. The ocean is her ally, which is still interesting. It's a great movie. I absolutely adore it. But it was so interesting to me that my first impression from the trailer was so drastically shattered when I watched the actual movie itself.
The only exception to this is brown princesses, because brown princesses are not European and therefore not Christian. So Pocahontas can have spiritual powers because she can have Grandmother Willow and she can have the raccoon whose name is Miko. And so she can have sort of quasi spiritual powers, but she's brown.
Yeah.
If you're white, you can't do it. Or if you're Jasmine and you're Muslim, you can't do it, right? And the only exception to this, of course, is Rapunzel, who starts with magical powers, but must lose them in order to have a family, right? In order to get back with her family, with her parents, and to have her boy, they must cut her hair off, and she has to lose her powers. Now, it's going to be very interesting now that they're doing the TV series of Rapunzel. I don't know how they're going to resolve this, right? And so if she gets her magical powers back in the TV series, this will be the first Disney princess that is allowed to keep her magical powers, right? Because even Elsa must be tamed.
Oh, right.
Right? So you look at Frozen and you say, okay, so let me get this straight. A woman who can make it snow is the most dangerous thing on the planet, but a troll who can wipe your memory is safe? Right. What? And let me get this straight. If he's that good at magic, why isn't he training her? She should go join Charles Xavier and become an X-Man. What is wrong with you? And then she should save Arendelle from a fire-breathing dragon. This is how this works. And your main export is ice and you have a problem with an ice princess? What is wrong with you?
Right. Oh, so interesting.
And so by the end of the film, what is Elsa? An exterior decorator. That's all she can do.
It's a little bit.
Right.
Yeah.
She doesn't save her own kingdom. If a guy had those powers, he would be saving his kingdom. So Disney princesses are surrounded by magic. They have fairy godmothers, they have devoted Prince Charmings, they have preternaturally friendly woodland animals that do their bidding, but they cannot have their own magic because then they become a witch.
Interesting. Now, this is kind of I may be jumping a little bit here, but are you suggesting that that this is a trend in storytelling that Disney or other, companies might be applying, or that this is a specific edict saying we are not going to do this? Maybe not for that stated reason, but is that something they say, oh, well, if you're going to do this Moana movie, she can't actually control the water herself. Please have something else. Do you think that that's occurring?
So I think historically it has been completely unconscious. Right.
Yeah.
Where is Disney getting their stories? They're getting them from the Grimm's fairy tales. And so this has been a part of the culture and the part of the subconscious programming for many, many years. However, in recent years, I have heard some interesting things, specifically with Avatar: Last Airbender.
Oh, yeah.
If you watch the first episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender, they make a big point of saying that they are not using magic, twice at least in the first episode. They say it's not magic, it's bending.
Oh, interesting. That's true. Because who is it? Katara and Sokka are on the water.
Right.
And he's saying, you and your weird magic or whatever. And she gets really, really pissed.
Now, Eric Coleman, who was the vice president of Nickelodeon at the time Avatar: The Last Airbender was coming out, came and brought an episode of it to CalArts, where my wife was studying animation at the time in like 2004 or 5 or something. And he was there and he expressed that specifically, that was a conscious choice on Nickelodeon's part to avoid offending anyone on the Christian right who thinks magic is demonic. These are the same people that protest Harry Potter, right?
Right, yeah.
And so Nickelodeon does not want to alienate any demographic in America, and so they had to be benders. They could not be magicians. So with Nickelodeon, it's now become a conscious decision. I think from Snow White up and through, Little Mermaid, Aladdin, and whatever, it was all unconscious. But now it might be conscious, I don't know, which is why it's going to be interesting to see what happens with this Rapunzel show, right?
Interesting. Yeah.
Also, the brown princesses are usually the ones that don't have to get married.
Oh.
Pocahontas doesn't get married. Moana doesn't get married. Kida at the end of Atlantis doesn't get married. She likes Milo a lot, and they're probably going to become a couple, but they're not married by the end of the film.
There's a long pauses because my brain is bleeding, I think, a little bit on the inside. Yeah.
And then to make matters worse, let's look at Brave real quick. Unfortunately, there's nothing brave about it. Bravery happens in the face of fear. In order to be brave, there must be fear. So either there is something that everyone is afraid of, but Merida has the courage to face, or there is something that Merida is afraid of personally, and she has the courage to face. But neither is the case. Merida is spunky, she's feisty, she's petulant, she's angry, but she's never brave. And she's set up as a warrior woman, right? We don't expect her to have magical powers because she's really good with a bow. And so you think, okay, she's going to solve this problem using her bow, the same way that Prince Philip is going to solve the problem using a sword and shield. Except that's not what happens. How does she solve the problem? By sewing. They have to domesticate her.
Oh my God, Crispin, you're killing me right now.
Right?
Oh.
And why? Yeah. Probably because it was Brenda Chapman's film and they took it away from her and Mark Andrews took over.
Right. And there's a lot of things I really like about that film, but it's interesting to me that I think some of this was subconscious, but now it's becoming more conscious that I have a almost 4-year-old daughter. And I'm watching movies from a perspective of, if this was a guy, would this be happening this way? Yeah,
Belle sings that she wants more than this provincial life in Beauty and the Beast, and then marries the hairy guy a couple of miles down the road.
Right.
Jasmine says she wants to get out of the palace. She feels all cooped up. She takes one ride on a magic carpet ride with a dude named Aladdin who's a con artist, and then she's willing to tie the knot.
Yeah.
Colette in Ratatouille, it says that she's the best cook in the kitchen and she has to work harder because she's a woman, so she becomes the girlfriend of the guy who can't cook and plays second fiddle to his restaurant.
No, I hear you. So my kind of inroad to gaming, I have a degree in marine biology, so my inroad to gaming is talking about aquatic settings and as a position or place to tell unique stories. So Little Mermaid comes up a lot. And I'm like, oh, you mean the story about giving up everything about yourself for that guy you saw on a boat that one time?
Right.
Like,
and it'd be one thing if to say, I saw this person and it is absolutely true love and I'm going to go for it. And what I have to do in order to do that is give up my voice, all agency, and I have to wait for him to kiss me. She can't do anything. She has to wait for him to kiss the girl. So she's in a completely passive position the entire show.
Yeah.
And I go, what?
Yeah, it's super frustrating. It's frustrating for me, and I'm like a straight middle-aged white guy. Like, I can't imagine what watching this over and over and over again is
So
like.
when Pixar says they get stuck, they say they go watch Miyazaki films for inspiration. The problem is they're not actually learning anything because the majority of Miyazaki films have female protagonists who have agency, right? Who can do things. Nausicaa is amazing. San in Princess Mononoke. Even Chihiro is fantastic. You know, she doesn't have to go slay dragons or do anything massively heroic because she's going on the one type of story that doesn't happen for boys, and that is the psychedelic journey. The only exception to that is probably Dune. But the Alice in Wonderland story, where a girl goes into a psychedelic environment and must learn something about their own psyche or the nature of the universe, that is a classic female hero journey of going down the rabbit hole. And it almost never happens for men.
Yeah, I can't think of a single example.
Yeah, I mean, the first one that comes to me is the psychedelic aspects of Dune and the spice and everything. And so that has, because he's becoming the Mahdi, he's becoming this sort of Shia Muslim hero, but not by following Islam, but by eating magic mushrooms. Like he's becoming the spiritual leader by becoming a good psychedelic
practitioner.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, well, that was fantastic.
Conclude Part 1. Part 2, T-7 days.
You've been listening to Whelmed, the Young Justice Files podcast. Our computer is voiced by Madison Ray. Our theme was composed by Emily Mio. Our logo was created by Kevin Bates. Whelmed is a fan-made podcast and is not officially affiliated with DC Comics, DC Entertainment, Warner Brothers Animation, and any other owners of Young Justice or its related source material. As such, these companies have sole ownership of all symbols, images, names, logos, and proprietary material related to Young Justice. Original content of this podcast is ours under Creative Commons. Thanks for listening, and stay whelmed.